disruption. The angry team will be here to duck on it. Yeah.
And now for the podcast with the biggest packages, Angry Scotland.
I can't believe that something of as much magnitude as it is, with what's been revealed so far by the inquiry, is not on the news every single night. And it's just that I think there's so much other fuckery in the world. But also I think it hasn't caught fire with the public imagination yet. People don't really know. Or I think people think it's resolved. They think a load of the postmasters have had their criminal convictions overturned and people aren't really realising the scope of what's gone on. It's nearly 25 years ago that the entire thing started. Under Blair's government, everything's Tony Blair's fault, isn't it, if it's not Thatcher's fault. And I think it was as part of wanting to privatise the post office. They wanted to get all the little sub-post offices off paper systems because they were on paper accounts, and doing a kind of weekly sheet that they would fill in, this massive paper spreadsheet that they would fill in of how many stamps and this, that and the other that they'd sold. It was understandable that they wanted to computerise this. And they wanted an electronic accounting system, like a till system for them. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't seem in any way unreasonable. But instead of perhaps rolling out something that was discrete to each office, they tried instead to make all of these little branch offices online in an era before the infrastructure existed for that to work properly.
Because this would have been like almost pre-broadband internet, I think.
It was pre-broadband internet. It was ISDN lines.
Yeah. For younger listeners, that's internet, but it go very slow.
That's what businesses used instead of whale noise dial-up. So basically, the structure of the post office was that you've got crown offices and sub-offices. And the sub-offices were basically the ones where it's a little post office that would usually be maybe a village or corner shop as well. They still exist.
You still get those, yeah.
And so those postmasters didn't exactly work for the post office. Mm-hmm. They ran their own business and they worked as a sort of freelance agent for the post office, doing the post office-y bit. And so this system was put out to tender and, as is always the way, given to the cheapest option, which was Fujitsu, who had bought ICL, who had bid for it and produced the lowest tender and therefore being given the job. And the product that they produced was wholly unfit for purpose. It didn't follow proper accounting procedures. It couldn't add up properly, and it was absolutely ridden with glitches and bugs. The software itself was terrible. Was wildly over-ambitious. The nature of what sub-post offices are is that they're shopkeepers who will be used to keeping stock and running a till and who'd been doing this paper-based system. They're not necessarily all that computer savvy. And you, 20-odd years ago, suddenly put in a computerised till system that is not particularly user-friendly and expect them to be able to manage the process of suddenly doing computerised accounts through this till interface that is not particularly easy to use. Secondly, they wanted it to be all live all the time so that the transactions were getting sent back to a central processing hub in real time so that you could do banking and benefits and everything was real time, which would be perfectly manageable now. But this was pre-broadband. This was going over ISDN lines, which fall over all the fucking time. And so it would just lose transactions. Thirdly, it appears that there were no unique transaction numbers. Now, a lot of people won't have experience with accounting software, but I do. I'm a bookkeeper by trade and I've got 20 odd years working on Sage. So sometimes your data goes tits up. It just happens. You'll get a bit of data corruption. And when it does, you find your last good backup. And what you do is you export the transactions from that point onwards. You clean them up. Then you go back to the safe backup. Then you re-import your transactions. And you can do that because every single transaction has got a unique identifier. Yeah. It seems like they didn't have unique identifiers for the transactions, which meant that it was almost impossible to actually recreate the data. So if the data fell over, it was just losing transactions, or it was duplicating them.
What was the company's previous experience in developing anything akin to this?
They'd never done accounting software, so they tried to write a piece of accounting software from scratch without apparently really understanding how double entry bookkeeping works or basic maths works.
And from the Tony Blair government level, is this where this is coming from, to move it off of public sector into the private? That was what we're kind of going with this?
I think that was in the background all the time, yeah.
In terms of what's being asked of the company, what you're describing is almost in an ideal pie in the sky kind of scenario.
Yeah.
And rather than having that maybe through the bidding process done through clarifications to narrow it down to an actually realistic, this can be done, this can be made workable, they've just taken this company's word at it, even though they probably know this is way out with the realm of what we normally work on.
To begin with, what happened was the company just promised that they would do it for a price that they thought they could get the work for. As so often
as is always the case.
They basically wrote a sort of trial version to show the UK government. And then instead of starting from scratch, they actually tried to make the trial software. They actually tried to use that as the core of the actual software.
Right.
That's a bit like making a model of the car out of balsa wood and then saying, but no, we'll use that.
Don't give Elon Musk any more bad ideas.
And so you've got transaction loss, transaction duplication, you've got failures of ISDN lines, you've got elderly postmasters a lot of the time who are not particularly competent with computers being asked with very little proper training to move to a system that they don't understand. Then you've got the issues of the helpline. There was a helpline that was meant to assist people if they were having issues with it, but those people didn't understand how it worked either. And so, postmasters would be phoning in and, that thing, if you've maybe just moved to a new broadband operator or something like that, and you've got a new router and for whatever reason it's just not working just yet, and you phone the helpline and you get somebody who's clearly reading the same book as you are, but with a Bangladeshi accent, and you feel like a racist because you're thinking, look mate, this bit I can do myself without the difficulties of interpretation. This isn't working for me. You know what I mean? So the helpline was hopeless, and the helpline was divided into people who had basically no technical competence, and then you could get your call referred up if it seemed like you genuinely had a bug, but those people didn't like taking the calls. There was a young man who gave evidence to the inquiry who had worked in the helpline, and he was British Asian, and he was absolutely horrified by how racist all the people on the helpline were, because a lot of sub-postmasters are actually shop owners, so a lot of them are actually of Indian and Pakistani descent. And we've got another scamming Patel on the line, was something that they would say in the office.
Do we have the figure for how much, so when they bought it?
I'm not sure.
I know cumulatively it's going to go a lot higher.
It was going on for years and years and years, because one of the things was initially they wanted to give everybody on benefits a benefits card that you would use instead of the paper system, because that was part of it as well, to try and get rid of benefits fraud. And Gordon Brown at the Treasury basically took one look at it and went, we're not having anything to do with that. And says, we're going to put benefits directly into people's bank accounts. And so a whole load of the work that was anticipated, because I think one of the things is that they bid low, but they'd said they would take a penny for every transaction that went on this benefits card system that they were going to provide. And then all of a sudden, all of that revenue was gone. It seems like it went backwards and forwards for ages with them being unable to provide a working product. And I think they were going to get dumped at one point, and the Japanese ambassador to the UK was actually visiting Tony Blair and saying this would be really, really bad for relations with Japan if you were to dump Fujitsu over this.
I guess the problem you have is that in terms of the person generating the request, whoever that was originally, going, here's our ideal system that we want. If they don't really know how to implement that system themselves, when it comes to writing the contract in such a way where you can outline, here's how you would breach it, you'd have to have the technical knowledge yourself to draft that accurately enough so as the private company can't push back and say, well, we're doing our best.
But this is part of the problem, is that the post office had a habit of always recruiting from within. And so people would go up and up and up in the management solely on the strength of being post office lifers who were loyal to the post office. And there's no larger collection of 40-watt bulbs that I've ever seen anywhere, including that massive lighting warehouse in Govan, than the post office management team. Thick as fuck, and malevolent too for a lot of them. So what started to happen was that the postmasters who were using this system were finding that they would only have to sort of balance up once a week. And once a week, they'd press the button, balance up, So they'd have to do the preparation work to count the tills. Post offices quite often used to be shut on a Wednesday afternoon or something like that. And I think that was the day that they would basically balance the tills. So you're dealing with a complex system whereby they're doing banking for people, they're taking bills for people, they're handing money out, they're taking money in, and selling stamps and selling road tax and a whole range of products like that. So once a week they do the accounts and submit. And what started to become evident was that postmasters would press the button for balancing and the figure would be sometimes wildly out. And the corrections system for that wasn't working terribly well. They were allowed to use what's called a suspense account. So money comes and goes all the time within a business, and most of the time you know exactly what it is and what you're doing with it and how you're coding it, because everything gets coded. But if you sometimes get something, money in or money out, that you're not sure of, you can't code it immediately. So you put it into some sort of suspense while you wait for more information on it. And so the postmasters were allowed to sort of write off to a suspense account if there was a discrepancy and wait and see if something came back. So sometimes it might be something like a check had gone astray or something simple and obvious like that. A couple of weeks later, it comes back. That's normal. And anybody that's counted up a till at the end of the night knows that you're usually going to be some amount of money up or down, even if it's just 30 odd p, because people make mistakes. But it started to be thousands of pounds for people. And they'd phone the helpline to ask for assistance and find that the helpline had talked them through what they needed to do to error correct. And a common bug seems to have been that maybe they got a £2,000 discrepancy and they run through the process to reverse it. And it becomes a £4,000 discrepancy. And they run it again, it becomes an £8,000 discrepancy. You can guess the rest. And this turned out to be because one of the bits of code had got a minus sign where it should have had a plus sign.
Fantastic. That's incredible.
I mean, it's the sort of thing...
And upon the first several times doing this, no one thought, let's go check the code.
It worked the last time we did it, so it's fine, right?
Turn it off, turn it back on again. It'll be fine.
And the way the contracts were written for the postmasters was that they were responsible for shortfalls.
Oh, shit. Oh, no, I can see where this is going now.
Yeah,
Okay.
But now, prior to the computerised system, shortfalls would be caused by you've given somebody change for 10 instead of a 5, or someone in the branch is stealing, or whatever. And so you were responsible for the shortfalls, and that was not an unreasonable situation. But when you put into the mix a piece of software that is effectively a random fucking number generator... Now, as it turned out, their contracts were not that they were responsible for things that weren't their responsibility,
Yeah, I was thinking,
but they were told.
Right, got
they
you.
were
Okay.
told all the time that they were responsible for
So
shortfalls,
the fear
and most
stress
of them
that would
believe them.
generate, yeah.
The Post Office is actually the oldest prosecuting body in the United Kingdom. It goes back before the police or anything like that, because the monarch's, the King or the Queen's postal service was of enormous importance, and so the Post Office was allowed to prosecute. It goes right back to highwaymen. And so they've had an investigations team and a prosecution team for hundreds of years, and prior to the Horizon system, they would be investigating embezzlement and theft and things like that at branches, and that did happen. There's wrong-uns everywhere. But once Horizon rolled out, it doesn't seem to have occurred to them that the rate of their prosecutions went up like the fucking COVID curve in April 2020. So it appears that there had always been mistrust of the sub-postmasters because they were this sort of other thing and they weren't part of proper post office. And so the post office themselves had always viewed them as this suspect army. And the investigations team just thought that they were all a bunch of grasping, conniving...
And now we've got all the evidence digitally.
And this is the thing,
black and white.
Rather than it occurring to them that maybe the software was going wrong, like all the sub-postmasters were saying, like, look, I think there's something wrong with the computer. It doesn't seem to be. Because some of the postmasters took to actually keeping complete records on paper or on a separate system so that they can match up. And they were saying, look, I've got a list here of everything we did, and it's different to what this is saying. But rather than believe them, they seem to think, we always knew you guys were at it, and now we've got the evidence to prove it. And every single postmaster that I've heard talk about it says, when I was being interrogated, and they were using the bloody read technique on them and all sorts, and they bankrupted people They sent people to jail. Hundreds of them were jailed. The reason that this story first got out into the press at all was a case of a woman called Seema Mistra, who was a postmistress, who ended up getting jailed whilst pregnant. Jeez. And she had to have her second child shackled to a bed, and she hadn't done a fucking thing wrong. And the way that they have been treated is disgraceful. And even now, the post office is still fucking around. So we've now got a public inquiry going on, chaired by somebody that I can only describe as a gent. Is this guy called Sir Wyn Williams, who is a very soft and kindly spoken Welsh judge. He's very empathetic. He's very kind. He's very polite. And you can see even him on occasions, you see this look in his eyes like, Jesus, fuck! Right?
Because it's a frustrating story for him, but I think for also even journalists trying to cover it, because it's one of these stories where there's not really a clear-cut good guy and bad guy.
There is.
So far I'm gathering it's more just a pattern of humans just fucking everything up on either side of the equation.
Is where
so where are we heading to with
where we are heading to, and what's come out during the inquiry is that the post office themselves, the higher-ups in the legal team and on the board of the post office, were getting it fed back to them that there really was a problem with Horizon and that they should stop prosecuting people. And I think they basically arrived at a point where they thought to themselves, if we do that, then we might have to unpick all these other prosecutions that have already occurred. So let's not do that. I think they decided to get an audit of the system, and rather than get sort of KPMG or one of the big accountancy firms or something like that, they very deliberately picked a tiny little firm of accountants that they thought would not be up to the job. What actually ended up happening is that this company called Second Sight turned out to be absolutely brilliant. And they had a look at the system and went, yeah, your system's shit. Mm-hmm. So the post office sacked them.
But it makes perfect sense. If you get an auditor in and they don't give you the answer you want, just get another one until you find something that
absolutely.
gives you...
Postmasters were getting prosecuted. Mm-hmm. They were getting their houses taken away. They were being made bankrupt. Mm-hmm. Many of them went to jail. And so what happened with a lot of them is that they would be threatened with being charged with false accounting and with theft, both. Mm-hmm. Now, when it came to the false accounting, a lot of them sort of were technically guilty of false accounting, in as much as there was nothing that they could do. They reached a point where they removed the suspense account system. And so the postmasters either had to accept the figure or they couldn't continue to trade. And because that figure was swinging wildly and forward, a lot of them were ending up keeping a pot. And, sometimes it's up, sometimes it's down, and just trying to manage it. But for some of them, it was going into tens of thousands of pounds, and they're putting money in from their shop to hold the till up and things like that, hoping that it's going to come back around at some point.
It's almost like being a pilot with like a dodgy altimeter, and you don't know how high you're flying. How actually stressful and nightmarish that would be.
They're losing everything, putting all their savings in, they're putting all their shop takings in to try and hold us up. Meanwhile, the post office has millions and millions of pounds in suspense accounts because so much more money is going into their system than they're actually turning over, because all these postmasters are putting tens of thousands of pounds in to try and hold the system up. Again, at no point does it seem to have occurred to anybody to look. But at one point, it was discussed that they should have a really, really thorough investigation into the Horizon system. And they decided they'd better not do that, because if they did that, they might have to undo the prosecutions that had occurred. And so instead, they got somebody to have a look at it and give them a rubber stamp that it was okay. And then every time anybody asked them about it, they said, no, look, we did an investigation and it said it was okay. And the guy that was tasked with doing that, we said, well, no, I was just asked to produce a report on the benefits of the system. I wasn't asked to investigate the problems. It appears that there may have been an active criminal conspiracy by people at the top of the post office to conceal the fact that there were issues and to continue to prosecute sub-postmasters rather than admit that there was a problem.
They just didn't want to admit that
they didn't want to admit that they'd fucked it.
Yeah.
I think there probably comes a point at which you've done so much that you can't go back. You can't reverse out of it. A reluctance to admit that anything was the matter. I think a lot of them probably genuinely thought that the postmasters probably were at it anyway and it kind of didn't matter. It's kind of terrifying, to be honest with you. And a lot of them were just thick as fuck. I mean, the evidence for some of the investigators and some of the people who were really high up at the post office, and you're just thinking, I wouldn't leave you with a cactus to look after.
Yeah, there's clear-cut good guy and bad guy in the sense that the bad guys were the idiots. But I mean, that's what it seems to be fueled by, as opposed to like clever malice. It's just more of a series
There's kind of a
disasters.
mixture of that as well. Like, at the lower levels, like there was probably, middle level managers who were like, I've got suspicions about those people, just they're prejudiced against them.
Yeah.
They're just, suspicious generally. And then because of that, when they're then asked to give evidence in court, they're kind of not telling the court about all these hundreds of times they had to check the systems, report to the helpline and all this kind of stuff. So it's a mixture of both stupidity, prejudice and criminality as well. I can't help but kind of think back. I think most people who worked in a big business in that kind of time period, like early 2000s, it was a time of like massive technological change. All these businesses were bringing in brand new systems and, they would break all the time. The technology wasn't necessarily up to scratch for what you're trying to do with it. People weren't, as familiar with these systems as well. The internet was fairly new. People were still, especially older people who were in high positions in a lot of these businesses, didn't really understand the technology. So they would just accept what they're being told. Up until the point where folks start doing the cover-ups, all that part is extremely familiar to me.
Yes.
I've been in a lot of these situations during that time period, but, we would never try and make someone's life a misery or just try and push something under the carpet. It gets to that point where, you have to admit that this is the system that's the problem.
There has to have come a point at which they knew and carried on regardless. And one of the issues that you got is that it now becomes apparent that they failed to disclose to people that they were prosecuting things that would have been exculpatory. And that's a huge issue because you only do that if you know actually that your case might...
I mean, that's just, it feels like the biggest, is that the lack of protections on the workers and stuff like that seems to be the biggest part of it, as in, like, when you enter into that scenario, the fact people were just absolutely allowed to be thrown under the bus and get away with it.
And the post office is still fucking around now. I think the 8th time just recently they've had to suspend planned testimonies from people because just before somebody was due to give evidence, the post office has suddenly found another fucking load of paperwork behind the radiator and gone, and it's really, really annoying because they do it on purpose. So there's two people in particular, John L. Singh and Gareth Jenkins. Gareth Jenkins worked for Fujitsu. John L. Singh worked for the post office. And every time they've been due to give evidence, the post office has suddenly found a whole load of stuff. And for everybody's benefit, it has to be gone through before the evidence can...
Have Fujitsu been quite cooperative, out of curiosity?
Fujitsu is still running the post office software.
So basically, so they're still absolutely in damage control mode here, going there's nothing to see here, system works great, don't fucking worry about it.
But the post office have breached disclosure so often that a few months back, Sir Win, the incredibly, honestly, he's like the ghost of Christmas present. He's the nicest, sweetest man. But he basically put them on I will send you cunts to jail if you keep doing this. He put them on legal notification that if there continued to be disclosure issues, there would be a legal penalty that could result in a week in jail.
The thing with rolling out a major contract like that, even way back in the day, there would still be key performance indicators the whole way through that. Obviously, you'd have gotten to a point where you realise this company, that have come in here to install all this stuff have just arsed it. Yeah. And you're not doing, monthly meetings, whatever, to go, it's broken. Could you fucking fix it, please? And I don't know what's happened in the background there, but that's that collusion-y bit where you wonder if it's like, well, we kind of know it's broken, but we can help each other out here, whilst helping nobody but a top-tier level that may have benefited from that arrangement, potentially.
It only became apparent at all there was a problem, and it sort of sneaked out into the public domain because of Computer Weekly magazine. Computer Weekly realised that it was an issue. So they're a really interesting publication. That's a trade publication. But they do some really good investigative journalism on computers fucking up. And so a Tory MP, who's now Lord Arbuthnot, was the MP for one of the subpostmasters. And she took the situation to him. And because Computer Weekly had covered it, he had previously looked into an RAF scandal with a piece of dodgy software. And Computer Weekly had done the expose on that when they tried to be a cover-up. And so he appreciated that Computer Weekly was a really, really quality investigative organisation, and so he took it seriously, and he's still campaigning now for postmasters and seems as decent a guy as a Tory gets. But Computer Weekly's still covering it now, and yeah, they're still covering up now. They're still fucking around, dragging their feet. They've not paid the postmasters. There's various fucking schemes for various people. There ended up being an organisation called Justice for Sub-Postmasters run by a guy called Alan Bates. And this is where I think actually this may finally break into full public consciousness, because there's a drama coming out on ITV, a TV series starring Toby Jones as Alan Bates.
It's such a damning indictment of the quality of journalism in this country, because I've had similar thoughts about all this to do with like the PPE scandal that's going on. People are rightful on Twitter going like, why is this not the front page?
Because what we have is that a state-owned company with powers of prosecution was acting as judge, jury and executioner on its own staff. It was investigating, it was prosecuting, and it was denying them the evidence that might have exonerated them all the time. And there's a curiosity of UK law with regards to computers, which is that, and this goes back to, I think, speeding cameras. I think it's speeding cameras. Yep. I think a common excuse for people to get out of speeding tickets used to be, prove to me that the camera was functioning properly.
Yes.
And so there was a law change that the onus of responsibility to prove that something is not working correctly is on the person challenging it. So if you could say, for instance, well, I can see that that camera's at X angle and therefore can't be calibrated properly, or blah, blah, blah. We can say, I can prove it. But when it comes to a complex networked system, how does somebody that runs a fucking shop in Yorkshire prove that this centralised fucking massive computer system is malfunctioning if the only way to do that is to get transactions from the person prosecuting them, who says that it's too expensive and complicated to give them to him, and then sends them to jail?
Just trying to find this picture of it was, I don't know if I've got it. My partner's sister got caught on a speeding camera. It's my favourite photograph, someone getting caught on a speeding camera ever, because she's driving along, she's like you can see it. And for this edit, I'm going to ask her to send that along, because it's really, really good. Sorry, anyway, back to the post office scandal.
As far as like getting it more in the public eye and stuff like that, like the Robert Maxwell like pension scandal, it got a lot more interesting when he fell off the back of his yacht and died. Not that I'm suggesting that anyone who's caught up in a scandal currently and has a big yacht should do anything rash, but I'm also not suggesting that.
Yeah. Thinking about what's going on with like the investigation into the SNP finances, you think about how long that's been going on for. I'm not seeing a lot of fire, and frankly not a lot of smoke even to begin with, but the amount of media coverage that has had without anything actually on the table, whereas we've talked about this for over half an hour probably now. Loads of stuff's on the table here and no one knows about it, and therefore we're not getting the traction to get justice done.
I mean, the sheer number of bugs that there seem to be in this system, some of them are just fucking ridiculous. So I mean, one that I encountered, because I think a post office that I used to use, and the Gorbals might have been one of the ones that had problems with the system. I have this memory of going in there and wanting to pay for a parcel that they were doing the ticket for and buy some stamps to take away, and the woman couldn't do it in one transaction. It had to be two transactions, and I think one of them was less than a £5, and it's back to the days when you know you weren't allowed to use your card for less than a £5, and I hadn't got any cash on me and all the rest of it. She's like, no, it's fine, but I need to put it through as two transactions. You're like, fine, whatever. I remember it because I was vaguely irritated by it, because I had a moment of thinking I'm going to have to fucking go back and go and get cash and all the rest of it. And I went through the accounts to have a look for transactions from that period, and found that there were something like a dozen occasions where I'd got two transactions for me on my card at that post office on the same day. So it must have been something that happened all the time. After the first time, I just didn't think about it again. That I knew that if I was going to pay for a parcel, I'd have to pay for that, and then I'd have to pay for the stamps.
That eventually.
Yeah.
Yes, that makes sense.
So I remember the one occasion, which will have been the first time it happened, and I remember saying to the woman why, and she said, "Oh, the till goes wrong," or something like that. But she explained to me, "I'd like the till can't do it."
Summary of the entire thing, really, when you think about
yeah.
it.
And it turns out that what would happen is it would double up things on the stack on the till, which would mean that the till would then be down at the end of the day. It would charge you for twice the amount of stamps or twice the postage value if you put more than one thing on the stack together. But if you just checked them out individually, it was okay. So they'd obviously identified and stopped letting people cumulatively pay because they'd realised what was going out. Another one was that one of the sub-postmasters said a lass was coming in and she'd withdrawn cash, which, you know, you could do at the post office, but you used to do it through the sort of pin machine rather than...
sort of type system thing.
Yeah. And this girl was putting a card in and she said there was just something about the way she was behaving that made the sub-postmaster a bit suspicious about it. And then she just kept coming in and taking out cash on this card. And this postmaster started having shortfalls and didn't take her very long to put two and two together and realise that the amounts of cash that this girl was taking out matched her shortfalls. And what was actually happening was that it was a paying in card. So it was a card that you were meant to use to pay money into a post office account. And what was happening was when she took the money out, it was actually recording it as a pay in.
And she's clocked that and has just tried to
She's
keep
clocked
doing
that
it.
and she's going around all the post offices withdrawing, air quotes, money. And every time she withdraws it, it's actually putting it into the bank account.
I mean, look, fair play, right? You know,
like, who wouldn't?
I mean, I had once at Belfast International Airport, I remember this, where it was a bunch of money was sticking out of a machine, and I was really young. I was like maybe 19, 20 or something like that. And I had that, well, it's like one of those moral moments where it's like, oh shit, here, because I could easily have gotten away with it, just walked away.
What did you spend it on?
Yeah. Well, I did take it, and I didn't make it more than 30 feet. And I was like, I'm going to go and hand it in. I didn't have it in me to actually walk out the door with it. And
So somebody had not taken all their money at the cash point?
yeah, it was like a couple of £100. Like, it was, you know, to me, that would have been a lot of money at that time.
Six it back in if you wait long enough.
Very weird, actually. It was like a wee old man, then, as I left the airport, came and tapped me in the back. So it was a good thing you did there. But he was dressed weird, and it was almost like if I had taken the money, I would have had some encounter with some sort of evil jinn or something like this. It was like all those sort of like Satan is judging you type moments or whatever.
You think it was the Adjustment Bureau?
Yeah, or something like that, yeah. But the point is that to give this woman credit, I mean, if you did clock, you could just get like $2,000 by walking into a post office. You'd be like, yeah, I'm going to go around all the post offices now.
Yeah, I'm para, there's like a camera crew around the corner when anything like that happens, after some money in the ground or something. I'm like,
yeah, that's where my head went. That's exactly where my head went. I didn't get far enough because I went, there's too many cameras as it is anyway, but there's that fear of like, you know, look, this fucking dickhead from Glasgow's come over here stealing this Northern Irish cash out of these fucking machines or whatever. And yeah, I didn't have it in me at all. But in fairness to her, though, I mean, if you could get away with that, then why not?
I mean,
there is the morally wrong part, I guess, but nonetheless, yeah, like,
I mean,
but broadly, you could just do it.
She couldn't possibly have known that it was coming out of the sub-postmaster's accounts, if you see
I don't
what
think
mean.
she would have cared really by the sounds of what she was doing.
Yeah.
I think she's made that leap at that stage.
I mean, no judgments, but basically it was a paying in card and it was being allowed to be used. Because the system was so fucked up, it was permitting her to use it as a cash point card effectively at the post office
For all we know,
counter.
she could have been working for the post office or whatever. She might have been the back end of this and she'd sort of know something on the inside, and that's why.
And yeah, because the system was just not identifying what it was that was meant to be going on. But yes, and she must have been doing that at a variety of post offices, I imagine.
She's also on a yacht somewhere right now, just living a great life on the back of all this.
One thing that I find really annoying about this and many other stories is you have these sort of inquiries after the fact, and it's all very kind of genteel and quiet, and you know, your QC will just ask some nice quiet questions and, you know, they'll answer it, and in the end the judge will say, oh, it wasn't that awful, that was terrible, right, let's just hope that doesn't happen again. And there's like zero accountability really, apart from like folk having been seen to have to admit things that they've done wrong. But I mean, that doesn't really get through to the general public, and I don't think it's really much of a deterrence from these things.
I mean, the worst that you can get is like you might have to go up to a podium and stand there and go, yeah, buggered that up a wee bit, didn't I? And like that's it. I mean, the Tony Blair's the all-time best one ever to have stood up and then apologised and then spent about 2 hours explaining why he shouldn't have had to say I'm sorry to begin with. I mean, that's not a punishment. You know, that guy should be in jail, but it doesn't matter.
I don't really have a good answer as to like an alternative here, apart from like the criminal justice system maybe just doing a better job.
Yeah.
And folks stop being arseholes.
It's interesting. I quite like watching a bit of a public inquiry here and there. I mean, I watched a lot of the Leveson inquiry.
That was the phone hacking one, wasn't
Yeah.
it?
These things cost a fortune as well. It's like,
yeah, I know.
Would you not just be better just handing this money that it costs to do the inquiry to all the folk who were wronged?
I mean, yes, But with something like this, where basically, as I say, you had a public institution wholly owned by the UK government that was conspiring to pervert the course of justice. I don't think there's any other description of what was going on. They're conspiring to pervert the course of justice and prosecuting innocent people rather than admit they had a problem when they knew they had a problem. The fact that they reached a point where they thought, yeah, we should actually produce a report into what might be going wrong. And they said, well, no, if we do that, we'll have to potentially go and admit that all these prosecutions were wrong. So instead, why don't we produce a report that says how great it is? And then we can show that to people when they ask. And that's exactly what they did.
And then we can be really surprised when we find out that it's gone wrong, because the report said we were doing a great job.
I imagine that what they thought was that over the time they would actually get the bugs ironed out and they would all just move on. And the fact that they'd ruined people's lives. A lot of the subpostmasters were persuaded to plead guilty to the lesser charge of false accounting because they were told that they'd avoid jail, and then a lot of them got put in jail anyway for that. And they were made out to be thieves, as if they were stealing benefits money and things like that. And that was how it was portrayed in the press. They were getting spat on and things like that. It's disgusting the way they were treated. And so you need a public inquiry like this. And this is why I'm desperate for it to actually get into the public attention, because people are so quick to put a beard on and chuck a stone, if you know what I mean. People need to be a little bit more circumspect about trusting the criminal justice system, because actually the criminal justice system is really broken in the UK. Terribly broken. The fact that an organisation was able to privately prosecute its own staff without anybody actually checking their homework.
I think that what you said there about thinking we could iron out the bugs, because that's often when this is how it starts. It's not like, let's be evil. It starts
no, of course
small.
Not. It's always the small conspiracy of convenience.
I think what it does highlight, and it's the problem with a lot of public sector tenders, or just tenders in general, actually, people that don't have the technical knowledge start doing all the contracty bit. I mean, ferries are relevant to Scotland on this front, where I think that actually might just have been the answer when you get down to it, that people didn't really understand how to build a ferry. Like, subcontracting that would have to go into it. And I think that's it, that because they have hired this organisation with this pie-in-the-sky ideal dream system, with having no idea how to actually achieve that themselves. The contract's not been good enough to begin with, but they've probably just taken this company's word that they can iron out all the stuff, because unless they themselves have the technical knowledge to push back and say, yeah, but I know that you're at it, I know that's not going to be resolvable in the next how many months, therefore breach of contract, therefore go back to tender again. And I think you're right, it's become normalised. They've thought, we can get away with this now, kicking the can down the road. Yeah. And then before you know it, it's 10 years, 15, 20 years later, and we're in this mess. But I think that's actually more often than not, a lot of the criminality in public sector contracting is probably around that kind of issue, as opposed to deliberately evil things going on, which again makes it hard to cover in the papers, because we have to have good guys and bad guys to journalists. It's difficult to get in the nuance like this.
But so I think Lee Castleton took the post office to court and they didn't turn up, so he won by default. And as a result of that, I think they sued him back and they bankrupted him and they threatened him. One of the solicitors that gave evidence, I think his name was Steve Dillon. Lee Castleton swears that this guy said to him, "We will ruin you. We're the post office. We've got big pockets. We will ruin you."
I know.
I know.
Because you just think of Postman Pat in my head.
Well, do you know what?
I will fucking ruin you.
I'll fuck you up. And my cat.
Just like Jess with a baseball bat going on.
Do you know the film Looking for Eric? It's about a postman who's losing it a little bit, and he's a huge football fan, and he keeps imagining Eric Cantona as his imaginary friend. So his kids are sort of caught up in gun crime, and in the end a whole load of posties fucking turn up all wearing Eric Cantona masks and kick fuck out of the guys, and one of the main characters goes, "You fucking leave him alone, because if you don't, I will find you, because I am a postman."
But I do love the idea of just, again, wearing all the silly postman outfits, but they're just like a mob. I love that, just the idea of the kind of gangsters sat around the table.
This guy was like Matt Hancock. He was absolutely unrepentant. He was an absolute fucking 24 karat cunt on the stand. It was really, really horrible to watch him. He was really, really annoying. And he was a dickhead as well, which seems to be the case with so many of them, because basically he was asked about this and like, we will ruin you, Lee. And he said, well, that doesn't sound like something I would say. And I'm thinking, I've been listening to you for about 2 hours now. It sounds absolutely like something you would say. But he says, and it's not in my notes, so I can't possibly have said it. Because obviously that's how threatening somebody works. You put that down in the minutes of the meeting. All right, yeah, that's the scene from The Wire. Are you taking notes on a criminal conspiracy?
Did you get that? Yeah. The bit where I talked about cutting his fucking legs off and throwing him in the river, make sure that's in there.
Yeah, make sure that's minuted. But then later on, he's asked about something that he's saying that he did said, and the barrister leading the questioning says, well, that's not in your notes though, is it? Well, no, it isn't, but I did say it. Right, so, but that's not in your notes, is it? Yeah. So this thing that you say is true isn't in your notes is true, even though it isn't in your notes. But this thing that you say isn't true because it isn't in your notes. You're going to have to pick one of those. You can't have both.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was quite shocked actually hearing some of them still trying to insinuate that it was the fault of these subpostmasters.
Oh, I know.
Even now.
Yeah.
Even now, they're
unreal.
still at it.
If you can say things like, but in my mind, I believed, because that was the Tony Blair thing, where although he was wrong, completely wrong, his way to get out of it was say, well, yeah, but I honestly believe. The honestly held belief is like the trump card that beats everything. It seems like that gets you out of any responsibility. It is,
however, there's so much evidence that they didn't believe that.
Right, okay.
So
you would have to be an absolute moron to have...
I mean, some of them are absolute morons, to be fair.
Yeah. Some of them are, actually.
I think it's more on a technical term for a certain level of IQ. Many of them wouldn't actually reach that threshold.
And also, it's a great way to try and get away with it, just poker face being an idiot. And then even if you did know, well, I'm just one of the thick ones. And you're in a lineup, you're like, well, you're all thick. I can't pick out the smarter one.
You know, the fact that the investigation teams were telling all the postmasters that nobody else was having a problem when it was perfectly obvious that other people were having a problem. The fact that they had millions of pounds of unaccounted for money in the post office suspense accounts at the same time that they're supposedly getting all these sudden shortfalls all across the country that postmasters have been filling in with their own money. You know, I mean, it was a criminal enterprise by this point. You can imagine somebody somewhere thinking to themselves, this is brilliant. Every sub post office in the land is handing us an extra $5,000 a year for fuck all. Why would we stop that?
I quite like all the petty stuff in this inquiry as well. Like the QC will go through... So it's Casey, isn't it?
It's Casey now, yeah.
He'll go through like their CV of each of these people, and he'll be looking at it. He'll say, well, it says here you were the head lawyer. Is that right? And they'll be like, well, actually, I was one of the lawyers. I think that was sort of my title. And he's like, so the word "the" in there is not actually accurate. You're just a lawyer. It's like so petty. It's brilliant because you just see these people like pure sweating. And
well, the thing is, on that case, that was John L. Singh just the other day, and John L. Singh, in fact, was the head one and was trying to pretend that he wasn't. I mean, it was Bart Simpson. Nobody saw me. You can't prove anything.
Mm-hmm. I didn't do it.
And he was the head criminal lawyer for the post office.
Yeah, it's extraordinary.
It's like orcs. Are you just fucking mining these things? They can't actually be fully functioning adult humans with fucking...
And while all this was going on, he was doing like a side gig.
Oh, I know!
It's like a commercial like sales
as
lawyer.
As a property lawyer.
Yes. Can't wait till I've got all these sub-postmasters in the jail so I can get on with my proper job, a side job of selling houses.
The long and the short of it is the post office is still fucking around. I think a lot of people think it's been resolved. It has not been resolved. A lot of postmasters are still living it destitute. I'm really, really hoping that the drama that ITV is doing about it puts it really firmly into public consciousness, and that as a result of that, the press start covering it more, because it's the largest, widest miscarriage of justice in UK history. Hundreds of people were affected. So many of them were jailed, and it cannot be allowed to happen again. And the only way that happens is if people understand that it's happened at all. And I don't think most people have any understanding that it's happened at all.
Everyone who listens to this podcast is morally and legally obliged to share it with all their friends and family.
I would say is that there's a really
if you're
good...
a victim of the post office scandal, please like and subscribe.
If you would like to support the Angry Scotland podcast, you can do so at patreon.com/angryscotland or by sending a one-time donation on PayPal. Link in the description.